Hi class. So today you're going to take notes over regionalism, and it really aligns with the time period of westward expansion. This is the literature that was being written about during that time. So you're going to see a lot of crossover characteristics that you might have learned about in history class, but that's okay. The reason why we focus on these literary movements is because they showcase how literature has changed throughout the years. When there's certain topics and characteristics and discussions going on in a time frame, that changes the way people write. If there's certain current events happening, that changes the way people write. So America has its own literary movements that stem all the way back to Native American literature. Um, but in this Health Academy, we're just going to focus on a few that can relate to the different projects that we're doing. But we will be talking about the literary movements throughout the year because on certain district assessments you will be tested on knowing the different characteristics. So make sure you're taking notes because they will come in handy down the road. So regionalism is actually a sub-movement of realism. This movement takes place from 1870 to 1910 and occurs at the same time as naturalism, another literary movement, which we'll get to eventually. Some topics of regionalism. Literature during this movement sought to reconnect a divided nation after the Civil War. So if you remember from any history class you've taken in the past, the Civil War happened in the 1860s. So this movement is taking place like right after, like 10 years after that. So if you think about it, people were divided between the North and the South, and they were very separated and isolated. And this movement was trying to bring those two regions together and celebrate their identities. So, following the Civil War, many people felt they lost their identities. So, the writers wanted to preserve for future generations their area's customs, character, and landscape through their writing. Often, this is called local color because they wrote about specific areas of the country, which allowed others to experience life as it was all over America. And even today, when you watch movies, um, if whenever you hear people with accents, like if you're watching a movie and it's set in Texas and everyone has a southern accent, or if you're watching a movie like The Fighter or Silver Linings Playbook where people have Boston and Philadelphia accents, those movies could be considered regionalism because they display that local color. They're really showcasing a specific place in America. Some more characteristics or topics of regionalism. Stories of life on the frontier captured the imagination of the more settled Eastern Americans and gave them a glimpse of the hard life they faced. And that really plays into westward expansion, right? Because you have all these people moving west. They're going to California, Alaska, and the people that are left behind on the East Coast, they want to know what's going on. And so all these stories started coming out, showcasing that experience of traveling westward and living on the frontier. Sometimes they were intense and scary because life on the frontier was hard. There literally was no law at all. So the writers kind of gave that opportunity for those who didn't want to leave the chance to see what it was like. Regionalist writers also wanted to show the ordinary life as they experienced it, and this is why regionalism is a sub-movement of realism, because these are realistic stories. They're stories that, while fictional, they could actually happen in real life. Um, so that's what makes it a part of realism. Some characteristics. Mainly regionalism um, focused on novels. Short stories were still very popular as a means of entertainment and information. During this time, Native Americans due to the loss of their land and scattered settling, had to move away from oral tradition and begin writing down the stories of their people. Um, so we'll learn a little bit more about that, but Native Americans were greatly affected by westward expansion because you have these white European settlers moving west and kind of uprooting these local tribes who had been there for generations. And along with that, they were interrupting their traditions and customs, and it forced the Native Americans to kind of take on some of those Western traditions of writing down their stories instead of just speaking them and passing them down in person to their loved ones. Some history that was going on. The Reconstruction begins in an effort by the government to reconnect the broken and angry Southern states to the Union. The South was in ruins with the loss of their primary labor system, which was slavery. Emancipated or free slaves found their new freedom challenging as they lacked money, property, education, respect, and opportunity. The Transcontinental Railroad connected the country in a way that had never been available before. Cities across America grew exponentially due to the connectivity of the railroad as more Americans began looking for jobs. As people moved west, Native Americans were pushed off their land and onto reservations. African Americans, especially in the South, faced oppression from the harsh Jim Crow laws meant to limit their rights and further segregate them from white citizens. So, some famous works and authors. We're going to read The Outcasts of Poker Flat. And as you're reading, I want you to really focus on the setting, how it takes place in California, and just what the town is like, because that really showcases what towns were like due to this westward expansion, due to settling in new territory where there wasn't really any established law system or justice system. I want you to focus on the characters and what the characters are like and how they interact and what motivates them. Because The Outcasts of Poker Flat is a really good example of what I'm expecting from you when you go to write your narrative, when you go to write your own short story. So keep those things in mind as you read.